again, we've got a broader legislative program than we've had in the past. Spectrum defense is supposed to be part of the league's business anyway, and we're focused on a particular defense effort at the moment. As all of you know, Congress has the power to order the FCC to sell frequencies. They have done that. 3, 4, 5, I think, if I'm correct, Fred, the 5 have already been auctioned off. We have retained secondary status on 3 gig for what, 70 years, I think. But when they auctioned those frequencies off, they removed us from secondary status. What is also important is that the military has had primary use of these bands. We were secondary, and the objections of the military to use or to the loss of the frequencies has failed to move anybody's needles. The authority to auction off 3.1 up to 3.45 is still pending before Congress. The House has authorized the FCC to auction the frequencies. The Senate has not. There's a dispute between the Senate and the House over what should be in that bill. We have been working with David Siddell, our FCC counsel, and our lobbyists to persuade the committee, which is the Energy and Commerce Committee in the Senate, to add language to that bill that would order the FCC to retain our secondary status. If we're not successful, we're going to try to get them to write into what is known as the report on the bill, a recommendation that we retain secondary status. And for those of you who checked in early, Marty and I were talking about service fees on amateur radio. Every 5 years, Congress passes a farm bill. In the 2018 bill, Congress ordered the Forest Service to revise their fee structure and start recovering more of their costs. The FCC held a notice of proposed rulemaking in December 21, and they were proposing to put a $1,400 fee on every communications facility in a national forest. If that happens, based upon our contact with all the repeater operations, almost every amateur radio repeater in the country will go out of those national forests because our guys can't afford it. So we have, in the last Congress, we were looking at introducing a bill to eliminate that. The chairwoman of the Senate Agricultural Committee, the entire New Mexico delegation, the entire Idaho delegation, all wrote letters to the Forest Service asking them not to assess the fee on amateur radio. Nothing happened last year. We're now in a new congressional session, and Senator Risch out of Idaho has volunteered to lead the effort. Instead of filing an independent bill, he is working to amend the 2023 Farm Bill. He's trying to insert language in it that will prohibit the assessment of that fee on amateur radio. If he's unsuccessful in persuading the other committee members to agree to that language, we'll file a separate standalone bill and run that through Congress. And for those of you who are a little bit late, I want to repeat again that Dan has done an excellent job hosting the state Idaho legislative director for Senator Risch and bringing support for Senator Risch to try and get this amended. And Dan, we thank you again. You did a great job on it. In 2014, the league filed, I think, what was it, Fred, 11709? A request to the FCC that it eliminate the speed limit on the symbol rate. What, we're 300 baud, 1900, 19.2, depending on where you are in the bands. We're the only country that has a symbol rate limit. What we proposed was that the symbol rate be eliminated and be replaced with a 2.8 kilohertz bandwidth. When they put the symbol rate limit in back in what, 1980, somewhere there, the speed limits they imposed, they thought were equal to, at that time, I think, a standard modem, which is about 2.8. That application is 8 years old, almost 9 years old now. The FCC hasn't moved it. Every year we've gone back to them, asked them to move it, they haven't. So the board of directors got tired of this and authorized us to file a bill in Congress, which we did, to eliminate the symbol rate. It will order the FCC to do so. There is a bill filed by Debbie Lesko out of Arizona called the National Amateur Radio Operators Day. It proposes to create a National Amateur Radio Day. And the last thing we'll talk about is what we call the PLUS legislation, private land use elimination legislation. And let me go here. Again, on the loss of secondary status, what we're trying to do is modify the pending Senate bill that will order the FCC to retain our status. If we can't, we're going to insert language into the committee report. On the $1,400 Forest Service fee, again, that effort's being led by Idaho Senator James Risch. And he's been working on this for months. He's doing a good job.
And he's our friend.
He is very much amateur radio's friend. And all the congressional reps and your other senator in Idaho are also behind Risch. Idaho is completely behind amateur radio on this issue. Debbie Lesko out of Arizona, she's the one that filed HR 3241 that will repeal the symbol rate limit and order the FCC to adopt the 2.8 kilohertz bandwidth limit. At this point, she has, I believe, she has no co-sponsors yet because we have not been focused on that bill. We'll be working on getting her co-sponsors. Debbie Lesko is on the Energy and Commerce Committee. All legislation in Congress moves through committees. The key committee for amateur radio is the House and the Senate Energy and Commerce Committees. And she's a key member of that committee. So she's the perfect person to sponsor this legislation. As we mentioned, she likes amateur radio so much, she's trying to get us a national holiday. Her husband's a ham. She really is a big supporter of amateur radio. But if you talk to people in Arizona, they love her. Although she's proposing to make April 18, 1925, which is the anniversary of the formation of IARU, a holiday, what we expect is they will become a permanent annual National Amateur Radio Operators Day. There's not any real opposition to the bill. It's just we have to get it in the committee and get the co-sponsors. The golden piece of legislation is the PLUS legislation, the Private Land Use Restriction Elimination Act. The lead sponsors on this are Bill Johnson. He was the first to step up, agree to lead it. Congressman Courtney out of Connecticut joined him. Congressman Courtney has sponsored every private land use restriction bill that we have filed since 2014. We've previously passed 2 versions of this bill to the House. Each one died in the Senate. So Courtney's a longtime strong supporter. Johnson, we've met with multiple times. You can ask Fred, he is very definitely strongly behind this. Since the bill was filed as HR 4006 in March, we picked up 2 more sponsors. Congressman John Larson, he is the congressman out of Connecticut, whose district actually includes headquarters. And then Congressman Mike Boss from Illinois signed on in the past 30 days. Now, the question that you want to ask is, so what? If these yo-yos pass this legislation, what do I get? That's what you get. Any restriction that prohibits an amateur radio operator from installing any amateur station antenna may not be adopted or enforced. That's a blanket prohibition. There's some details in the bill that we can talk about, but that's what the bill does. That's the lead paragraph out of the bill. But because Fred is a brilliant individual, the bill has another provision. If you live in an HOA, in order to put up a deck, put up anything on the outside of your house, you normally have to ask for permission from the HOA Architectural Control Committee. So you have to get pre-approval, and you have to go through a lot of forms and nonsense to do it. Well, this bill will permit for certain types of antennas that application process to remain in effect. It limits the ability to adversely act against amateur radio, but we leave it in place. We can discuss that later. But Fred's idea was that there are some antennas that are effectively permitted by federal law already. The difference between the ones that are permitted and the ones that have amateur radio on them are the use. So Fred's idea was that we would put into the bill a guarantee that an amateur radio operator could install certain antennas without obtaining approval of the HOA. If any of you are familiar with over-the-air reception device rules, you can put up a TV antenna, you can put up a satellite dish, all without approval. So Fred's idea was to mirror that. So besides that broad-based prohibition, the bill will guarantee, without having to get pre-approval, the following. It gives you the right to put up a flagpole up to 43 feet that happens to be a dual-use antenna. And by the way, that photograph is a photograph of an actual dual-use antenna in Virginia in a Toll Brothers subdivision. Fred was the champion of the amateur radio operator to fight the HOA to obtain permission to put that up. They gave him permission to put up a flagpole. And Fred, feel free to talk at any point you want to. But when the ham told him it was also going to be an antenna, they went ballistic and threatened to fine him, sue him. Because of Fred's brilliance, they lost. But if you have the right to put up a 43-foot flagpole, it's a vertical device, so the bill also permits you to put up a vertical antenna of the same height without a flag on it. Why is it already?
John, a question has just been asked of us. What about state and local building codes? This bill, as we've written it, has no impact on those. They're still binding.
It has a specific, we'll come back to the restrictions that are permitted in a minute. But Fred's correct. This bill doesn't alter any governmental regulations, federal or state. Now, why do we think this ought to be permitted without approval? In 2005, Congress, getting tired of cities, counties, homeowner associations prohibiting citizens from displaying the American flag, passed the 2005 Right to Display the American Flag Act. Under that act, which is what, 2 paragraphs, I think, Fred, it has a blanket prohibition on prohibiting any citizen from flying a flag, American flag. If you're going to fly a flag, you have to have a flagpole. So flagpoles and flags are already permitted under federal law. So the only difference between this and what is now permitted under federal law is that we state that that flagpole may be dual use. It can be an antenna. And we put a height on it that is compatible with reasonable operation, 43 feet. You don't have to put in 43, but you're entitled to up to 43. And again, if you can put up a 43-foot flagpole, take the flag off, make it a vertical. Now, Fred's an expert on OTARD, so he can answer any of your questions. And what you're looking at is a legal TV antenna on a legal tower. And Fred was involved in seeing to it the amateur obtained, or the person who owns this lot put it in. Fred, you want to tell him about that?
I'm just answering a question from Doug W4DBL in Port Orange, Florida, who asks, in Florida HOAs, you can put up satellite dishes or other off-the-air antennas, but the HOA has the right to determine aesthetic or conforming locations. And my response is, nonetheless, the aesthetic or conforming locations restrictions cannot prevent the erection of an OTARD antenna. So while now the next question you asked me was the story behind the photograph we're looking at right now.
Yep.
This is a North Carolina HOA, single family homes, each home on about 1/4 of an acre. And what we did there was I was blessed with an extraordinarily intelligent client, W4VKU, VU2VKU. And basically, we have erected a standalone tower with a VHF UHF TV reception antenna. And once the condo association realized there was nothing they could do about this, Then he wanted to put up a step IR antenna in a tree, rotating it around the tree, believe it or not, in his backyard. Well, you can't even see it. And so we sort of won that battle one step at a time, and the guy's on the air now. He also did something I told you was incredibly smart. He went to work as the treasurer of the HOA and sits on the board. And basically now he prevents them from passing any stupid regulations that will really impede amateur radio. While there are still aesthetic restrictions, hams can now get on the air from his HOA. So he did several good things. He got his own antenna, and he's now helping other hams. There aren't any, but helping them get their antennas erected in this HOA. The question that's being received now from W3DKL is essentially, why not go about this state by state? And the answer to that is, I'm happy to support anybody who wants to introduce a state attempt. And we have done that in some states, in Maine and New Hampshire here in New England. But it's a lot of effort to get one of these things passed. And the lobbyists for the homeowner associations, the Community Associations Institute, are very good. And the question becomes, would you rather have 50 fights or one big fight in the Congress? I think we should take the battle to all battlefields. Happy to support anybody who thinks he can get a law introduced at the local level.
Let me add something to what Fred just said. Before I became a director, I was legislative director for Texas and Oklahoma, West Gulf Division. We have passed amateur radio friendly legislation in Texas and modified bills in Oklahoma. The problem with going state by state is that you need to have people on the ground who have the time and the expertise to actually lobby before any state organization. It's difficult. It takes a lot of time. It takes almost every month of any session for you to be there to continue to push for the legislation. The HOAs, as Fred said, running under CAI, have paid lobbyists that are there all the time. So we would end up with very spotty results. We have 50 states, and with spotty results, you could end up with inconsistent state laws. Since Congress has the power to regulate, it was decided that since we can't count on bringing people like Fred or Dan or Marty Wall in any given state, it was better to concentrate our forces where we could guarantee that we've got the expertise and talent and the money, because we have 2 lobbying firms working for us in Congress right now. So it's a good suggestion. It was considered a number of years ago, but the league lacks the resources to do it state by state. And as Fred said, it's simpler to shoot one bird than 50. So that's the reason we're good doing it through Congress. And let me make a comment about aesthetics. The thing that an HOA wants to control are aesthetics. Aesthetics is hemlock. It's cyanide. I can guarantee you, if I'm running your HOA and I have that as a standard, you could not put up anything that I get a couple of homeowners to come up and go, it's ugly. It scares my cat. Aesthetics is so broad, it covers anything. One of the problems with the previous versions of the bill that went through Congress twice, our House twice, and died, was our representatives for the league and the lobbyists agreed to let them put in the word aesthetics. We pulled that bill from Congress in 2019 because they had so bastardized the bill that had it passed, it would have wiped out amateur radio in the United States, because it gave the HOAs federal regulatory power over amateurs. So under OTARD, if you want to put up a satellite dish on the front of your house, they can't stop you. They may, I should explain, I've been president of associations and run ACCs before. So once the OTAR Act passed through Congress in '96, the regulations were issued, a lot of HOAs decided to go, well, if you, Jimmy, want that satellite dish, you have to put it on the back of your house. Funny thing about satellites, if you can't see them, you can't receive. So this was their way of controlling a law they didn't like. They lost. The rules are now, even if they say it's not aesthetically pleasing, you can put that antenna on the front of your house and run those cables down your wall without concealing them. On TV antennas, I'm afraid you've got more expertise. Some of the cases have been heard before the FCC. I don't believe that under OTAR, if you're an HOA and you want to fight with the homeowner for an installation that is permitted under OTAR, the fight goes to the FCC. And Fred, am I correct? No homeowner association has won a fight at the FCC yet.
To date, since the creation of the OTAR rule, which was
1996.
originally created by Congress and then promulgated by the FCC in 97 CF 47 CFR 1.4 thousand, no homeowner association has ever won a battle against the TV viewer.
That's the reason the language in this bill, and the primary authors of the bill are Fred and I, so we have little idea what it is. It was designed to be crystal clear. Aesthetics is not a word that's in this bill. That was by intent, because if it shows up, we, amateur radio, lose. In fact, one of the permitted antennas, satellite dishes. And by the way, if you look at that closely, it's been modified for operational amateur frequencies. Marty probably knows about this. I can tell you how that's done. So you get a flagpole, which is permitted under federal law already. You get a satellite dish, which is permitted already. The bill doesn't alter OTAR. It would permit you to put up a tower like you saw in the previous photo with a Yagi on top of it because it's permitted already. And the fourth antenna that is permitted without prior approval are minimally obtrusive wire antennas. And nobody laughed. How many of you know what that is?
I laughed, but I'm muted.
I'll accept that. For those of you who don't know, that's known as the Woodpecker. That's an over-the-horizon radar sitting now in the prohibited zone inside Chernobyl that the Russians used to use. It was called the Woodpecker because of the constant chirping it made. I doubt if we can put that up in the backyard. But for someone I think asked a question earlier, and this goes to that question. Congress has already indicated how it feels about amateur radio. It did this in 1994. It passed a House and a Senate joint resolution. They read the same. Congress declared reasonable accommodation should be made for the effective operation of amateur radio from residences as a public benefit. Does that mean automatically Congress will pass the legislation we're asking? No, but it does indicate that they have taken a look at amateur radio and believe that for what we do, we are a benefit and we should be given some accommodations.
I'd like to make two comments about the words you're just reading there. If you could go back, John.
There you go. I'll go back.
First,
I'll get there in a minute. There you go. There you go. Well, hang on. Being stubborn. There you
go. The words from residences are important if some municipality tries to tell you that you can be a radio ham, but you should do it with a remote site. The second thing I would call your attention to on this slide is the public benefit language, because most zoning ordinances that I read require that any application be consistent with the purposes of the ordinance. And when you've got a federal resolution of Congress saying that amateur radio operation from a residence is a public benefit, you've pretty much matched any requirement in the purpose clause of a local zoning ordinance.
Fred is dead right on that. For those who wonder whether or not you can eliminate private land use restrictions by law, here's a short list of land use restrictions that have been overturned by state or federal law. I mean, some states, California one, mandates solar being available for new home construction. In Texas, most every new government building is required to have solar panels. We had a fight in Texas over energy efficient roofing shingles. The HOAs thought they looked different and opposed them. It took, I think, 4 years to get that bill passed. If you live in a drought area like California, Arizona, New Mexico, Texas, collecting rainwater is prudent, but under most HOA documents, they prohibit it. You would think composting wouldn't get anyone excited, but they have prohibited. Xeriscaping, particularly in drought areas, is important. They prohibited it. In some subdivisions around the country, they prohibit certain types of grass. There is a classic case out of Garland, Texas, where an HOA objected to a pickup truck, a Ford F-150 being parked in a driveway. Think about that. The Ford F-150 is the largest by volume selling pickup truck in the country. The HOA tried to prohibit it. At one time, they wouldn't let you put up political signs. Clotheslines for a long time were permitted. Standby electric generators, and I don't mean the one you get at Home Depot. I'm talking about the one that sits on a concrete pad.
John, you said that clotheslines were permitted. I think you meant prohibited.
They were. You're correct. Thank you for it. They were prohibited for a long time. They're now permitted.
And now this is known as the right to dry.
I like that. I haven't heard that. So that's the legislation. That's the basis for it. And Dan, with your permission, I'm going to kill sharing. So when we come back and we'll look at each other. We're back. I think we're back. You see Fred and me now. So what can we, questions can we answer for everyone that's here?
Is there any difference in the language between the old bill and the new bill? Because Dave from Maryland is asking about that.
I think the legal term for that is hell yes. The previous bill was a disaster. Our general counsel at the time, whose employment we terminated, along with some other people who didn't know anything about legislation or HOAs, effectively let the HOAs write the bill. There's a famous email between our general counsel and the lobbyist for the HOAs at the time that said, we gave you everything you asked for. The bill gave the HOAs absolute authority, where before, if you violate an HOA restriction, it's a local bitch, okay? But since it was going to become federal law that you had to have their approval, if you violate it, it's going to be an FCC regulation. If you violate the HOA restriction, you are violating a federal regulation, which they could use to object to your license renewal next time. That's how dangerous that bill was. So no, Barry, it's not even close. Nowhere near close to that bill. This bill.
Let me point out too. I happened to be on the board at the time, and John was the first one and really the primary one to pick up on all these poison pills that were in that legislation. And that is actually part of the reason I left the board, so that I would not be under the constraints of the board's rules to start fighting the thing and getting the word out. And it was in conjunction with an upcoming election. And the results of that were to replace 4 board members and have a majority that was able to stop this turkey before it got going, and replace it with a real effort from people who know what they're doing.
Let me remind everybody, if you got a camera when you come on, please have your camera on.
And another thing, the language of this bill has been worked on since 2019. We've gone through multiple drafts. Jim Teamster, the late Jim Teamster, worked with us on it. The primary work has been Fred and myself. We've met with people in Congress. If you want to file a bill in Congress, Senate or House, you give it to a senator, you give it to a congressman. He's going to send it to Legislative Council, House or Senate Legislative Council. Their job is to assist in the drafting of legislation to make sure it fits standard congressional formats, that it doesn't violate the Constitution or other laws, And the expert on this is David Siddell. He's on your screen. David is, we are fortunate to have David as ARL's FCC Washington counsel. And his assistance in working through Congress and the FCC has been invaluable. It'd be far more difficult if we didn't have him.
Yeah, and once this gets going, it's going to be an all hands on deck. All of us are going to have to be in support of it and really show our congressmen and senators that we really want this to be passed. And that's why we're trying to get the word out to everybody.
We have not, at this point, the Congress is in recess. I think, David, you would be more accurate on this. Within the next week or so, they come back in the session. And that's when everything really starts ginning up. We have not started a national campaign requesting individual letters or support from members because the bill's not yet come, hasn't yet come up before committee. And we've been making an effort to pick up some more co-sponsors. But that doesn't mean that any of you who actually have contact with senators or congressmen or congresswomen, that means direct contact. If you know them, but you have somebody who knows them, working with them directly is a good thing. If you have contacts that are that good, that's the reason we picked up Mike Bost out of Illinois. Some hams up there actually had contact with the congressman and his staff. We're able to persuade him to come on board. If you've got those kind of contacts, get in touch with Fred or with me so we can work with you and pick them up as co-sponsors. But as Barry pointed out, it's going to be all hands on deck. Once we have the schedule for where and how this bill will be moving, then we'll be coming out to every member asking you to contact by letter or email your congressman and your senator. The logistics for that will be worked out. It'll make it easy for you to do, but constituents count. If you're elected to any office, you get there by two means: money and votes. And if you as a constituent call your congressman and go, Jimmy, I want you to support this. Jimmy may not know you from Adam, but he will know that you're a constituent. You have the ability to vote. He will listen. He may not do what you want, but at least he will listen. So it's each contact is important. Even if you think I'm only a single person, it doesn't have any effect, it does. Any other questions or points that anyone want to make? And get a copy of the current bill.
4006 if you want to see a copy of what was presented.
W3DKL has just asked for a copy and I sent it to you by email. You should have it in your inbox already.
Great.
And we can give it to Dan and he can circulate to everybody also. But if you send either one of us an email, you don't get it that way. We'll send it to you just like Fred did now.
Dan, do you have a copy already?
No, I don't. Go ahead and send that stuff to me and I'll make sure it gets up.
Go ahead, Fred, send it to him.
I'll send it to you right now, Dan.
Yes, Brian, did we say prohibited pickup truck in the community in Texas? Yes, they were objecting to a pickup. Dave, Whiskey 3, you asked about the language between this bill and the one that was introduced last December. They are the same. We introduced this bill in December, even though we knew it wasn't going to make it out of the session, because we wanted to fix the language. We wanted it filed as a matter of congressional record. We wanted to be able to use that language to go to potential sponsors and go, here's the language. This is what we want you to support. We knew when we did it, it would not make it out of Congress because Congress, I think it recessed about a week after we filed the bill. So we did that deliberately, and there are probably 5 words, Dave, difference between what we filed as 9670 in December and 4006. And the reason for the 5-word change is we were working with legislative counsel and they thought we could make something clearer, so we agreed to change the words. Mike, you asked about state and local building codes can be difficult. Most state and local building codes do not adversely affect amateur radio. Zoning ordinances can affect the ability to install towers or antennas and or the height of them. But normal building codes that define exactly how you have to build it, what materials, they aren't much of a problem. That's the reason we permitted those restrictions to apply in the bill. Any other questions, complaints, suggestions? Interview on a date with Fred.
It reminds me of the second opinion joke where the punchline is, and you're ugly too.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
But I would just remind you guys who are on you guys and gals who are on this call, and that free time with a lawyer is a rare thing. If you have a question, this is a good time.
I might ask that you use your Zoom raise hand. I see Marty had his hand up. I just saw that. If he hadn't, let's use the Zoom thing so you all know that you got your hand up. Go ahead, Marty.
Okay, thanks. Just wanted to, on the building code issue, a reminder that that is really a function of safety and not one of aesthetics or neighborhood design or anything else. And usually the building codes also incorporate the National Electrical Code or some form thereof. And that talks about, grounding conductors coming into a building and things like that. So I don't think anybody wants to, challenge those, and we don't want to raise an issue of safety. That we only do things that are safe, and we don't want anybody to think otherwise. So I can understand completely why we're leaving those alone.
Okay, Lloyd, you want to come on here now?
Yes, I can do that. Sorry about the background noise if you hear anything. I just want to remind those that will be speaking to the congressmen, senators, legislators, that the federal government has officially endorsed amateur radio in the National Incident Management System. FEMA and DHS-CISA are both supportive of amateur radio in the National Incident Management System. That's a big deal because for the first time, it has officially been recognized that amateur radio has a viable, solid, and necessary need in our emergency communications process. So that's not in the bill. I just kind of breezed through the bill, and it probably wasn't ready when y'all wrote the bill. But that's something you want to keep in the back of your mind, that it's not just the locals that would guarantee, benefit this, but the feds themselves have already said this is something that we need.
Thank you, Floyd. That's good information. Dan, you got your hand up. Take her away.
Yeah, I'm embarrassed because I honestly don't remember where in the Federal General Services regulations it was, but I think as recently as the late 1990s, federal buildings that were owned and run by the General Services Administration they either had to support or give a good reason for not supporting local amateur radio communications infrastructure on the tops of those buildings. That actually, last time I referred to it was, I think, 1998 when I transferred to Yosemite National Park. And that got me an antenna on the roof and amateur radio that was put through the comm shop just to, assure its spectral purity in my office. And I'm wondering if so the government has in fact supported amateur radio in many ways. And I'm just wondering if any of the gentlemen that are experts in this know if the General Services know specifically what that General Services regulation was, and if it's still valid and could be used in the, in designing or supporting what's underway right now.
I'll defer to Fred. I don't know, so I don't have an answer for you. You look it
I
up.
never heard about it, but I'd really like to find out more.
Well, it was there, and I haven't heard from it since. But
Well, my thought is that you have background in this and Google is your friend.
Well, yeah, you don't need Google to go through agency regulations. You need more patience and time than I'm willing to invest on that.
You need a friend who's good at Google.
Okay, Marty, you got your hand up? You're muted, Marty.
There we go. Question on the baud rate legislation, the symbol rate legislation. The ARRL version that was submitted back in 2014 or 13, whatever it was, in addition to replacing the baud rate limitation with a bandwidth limitation, also included recommended restrictions on where unattended digital stations could operate. And that has been a real concern among WinLink operators and others who do public service, that that restriction could really kill the ability for effective HF digital communication. Am I correct in assuming that the legislation that you are proposing there or are moving through does not make any references to band segments or anything like that? It's strictly a replacement of the baud rate limitation with a bandwidth limitation.
That's correct. We have other matters pending before the FCC that can address that. David Siddell, you want to
Yes.
answer Marty's question on that?
Yeah, hi, Marty. It's it only addresses the symbol rate. That is correct. The FCC notice in 2016, as you know, being a lawyer, defines the issues that a decision can be made on now. And the FCC did not address that in any fashion in that notice. And so it's not ripe for any kind of decision at the FCC. Having said that, we, as you may know, we have 2 petitions pending before the FCC that address broader bandwidth subband matters, and that would there's been no NPRM there, so it certainly would be appropriate to discuss it there in any fashion, and I'm sure it will be, being quite familiar with the comments. So that's where it has to be taken up, just because of the timing and what's in the 2016 notice of the FCC.
Thanks, David. I'm not a lawyer, by the way.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was giving you. If I hurt your feelings, I'm sorry.
I will take no offense. I'm a retired CPA.
Okay, Gene, you got your hand up. Want to take it away?
Yes, a very broad question. It's probably regional than anything else, but when it comes to the FCC restrictions and the FAA restrictions, who trumps who? I'll give you an example. I am line of sight 3 miles away from a regional airport, and on the other side of it is an Army airfield. It has fixed wing and rotary wing aircraft flying in and out of there day and night. Who trumps who when it comes to a situation like that? As
I
far
actually
as
I
Go
actually
ahead.
know the answer to that question.
Well, I'd be happy to answer it. Actually,
Right.
having dealt with the FAA for my time at the FCC, I used to have to coordinate with them as part of my job. And the answer is very simple. The FCC does not claim any special expertise with regard to air flight safety, and therefore they defer to the FAA almost always, whether that's by law or by custom. You find your experts on airline safety and airplane safety at the FAA and not at the FCC.
Thank you very much.
Or let me just put it another way. PRB1 preempts municipalities and counties and state law, does not preempt FAA regulation.
Okay, that makes sense. When I was in the military, we used to have to put up pretty tall towers, temporary towers, and we used to have a beacon on top of them, regardless of where they were at.
Okay, Marty, you got your hand up. Go ahead.
Put on your microphone, Marty.
Got to kick. All right. I had to deal with this myself some years ago. If you're 3 miles or more away from the nearest point of that runway, and assuming those runways are 3,000 feet or longer, the relevant I think the relevant regulation is FAA Part 77. They have an imaginary surface of 1 foot vertical for every 200 feet horizontal from the nearest point of that runway. And if you, as long as you don't exceed that, if you're 3 miles or more away, you're looking at an imaginary surface at your place of 75 feet. Anything under that will not fall under that rule.
In addition, if you'd like an informal, but usually very accurate way to find out if you're allowed to do what you'd like to do, go to the FCC website by looking up the word TOWAIR, TOWAIR. Fill in the blanks, and their application will pop up an answer for you.
Cool.
There was TOWAIR, TOWARR.
That's my Boston accent. TOWAI. And then the last letter, I will tell you in Boston, is pronounced ah.
Yeah, it's all right. I'm from Boston originally too, so I understand.
Okay, good.
Thank
Okay.
you.
All right, don't see any more hands up. Barry, how we doing in chat?
We're doing good in chat.
Yeah, this has been a great presentation.
I just have one question. Is W7LAW a lawyer?
He is, he's not.
I am not a lawyer, no.
Great call sign.
Well, thank you. LAW is my maiden name.
Still a great call sign.
It is, good CW call too.
Thank you.
Okay, I don't see any more hands up. We've still got time left here. We can open this up for just comments if you like. Are there any general comments out there?
I have one quick thing. Steve Waterman is particularly knowledgeable in the area of bandwidth, and I wonder if you had anything to say, Steve.
Okay, Steve, you're on. Turn on your camera.
Well, who's that asking?
K1VR, Fred Hopengarten.
Yeah, turn on your
Okay, well, yes, I've got several items. The 2.8 kilohertz bandwidth came from David Sumner. When I was involved in the formation of the 5 megahertz channels, and he actually was involved in that process also, obviously. And he noticed that at that time, the ITU channel was 2.8 kilohertz. And according to David, when that question came up, he just pulled that up, and that was where the 2.8 came from. There's no real technical reason why it's 2.8 kilohertz. My problem with that is that was the only item taken out of the notice proposal for rulemaking request by the ARRL when the docket 16-239 was written. And because of that, there's a long history of the FCC not imposing bandwidth limitations, quote, because it would impede the radio art, quotes close. Well, physics today would not dictate that I don't have any problem with 2.8 kilohertz bandwidth. The widest bandwidth now used is an orthogonal frequency division multiplex signal, which is 2.75 kilohertz, called Vera. And it can't get much wider than that and be effective with today's technology. The problem I have is that the FCC would then have to limit FM, AM, CW voice, CW signal sideband voice, and micromanage that. And if they did, how would they do it? And if they put that on the official observer, how would the official observer be able to do the same? That comes to my mind. I am all in favor of getting rid of the symbol rate rule simply because it's being violated every single minute. Because frankly, the current or orthogonal frequency division and other multiplex signals all exceed that symbol rate rule by the strictest definition. The FCC is aware of this, and I don't think that it makes much difference that they're aware of it. I think that there's a lot of overhaul that needs to happen with respect to Part 97.113. The other thing that I have a little beef about, frankly, is that the current or the last band plan that I saw from the ARRL eliminated 97.221C, which are digital automatically controlled digital signals that are less than or 500 hertz or less than 500 hertz. Their plan was to add a few more kilohertz to 97.221B, which are digital automatic signals that are over 500 hertz, like Pactor 3 and Vera HF, etc., and put the signals that are not currently imposed within that subband, dump them in that subband along with the wider band signals, and put everything in those small subbands. For example, you have a 2.75 kilohertz signal. WinLink has 438 scanning 24-hour a day, 7-day a week radio message servers on a 5 kilohertz bandwidth. 438 2.7 kilohertz, 2.75 kilohertz bandwidth signals on a 5 kilohertz bandwidth. That doesn't promote advancement to the radio art. That doesn't promote youth coming into amateur radio. Tomorrow night, we're going to learn about an iOS application that is now a client for WinLink, but frankly, it doesn't help. It hinders, because that's just going to add more traffic to the problem. Likewise, the federal government has provided other options for emergency communication using amateur radio facilities and equipment off the Part 97 spectrum, realizing that problem exists. What to do about that? I'll leave that to Mr. Sadal. He's the expert.
Okay, wow, that was a mouthful there, Steve. You did good, and your memory worked okay. Mine don't work like that.
Well, I live it every day. I've got to deal with it. In Hawaii, I'm dealing with it right now. I mean, it's in other parts of the world. I'm living with that when it involves the United States. So it's a real life situation. Life and death situation, and it can be. If something happened and we needed spectrum, there's no priority, and there shouldn't be on amateur radio. Amateur radio is not an emergency service, but it certainly has done a lot of good over the years in assisting our society. And I want to do everything I can to up the ante to make that happen more often.
Thank you, Steve. A while ago, somebody had their hand up. I saw it, and then they took it down. Did you change your mind, or would you like to come back?
Sure. It was Dave from Maryland. First of all, I just want to say, Fred, I'm actually the new state government liaison for the Maryland, D.C. section for ARRL. And I recently just did a presentation to my amateur radio club in Montgomery County here. But I really want to thank you for that book, your third edition of the antenna zoning. That really helped me a lot, because the big issue here now is really the issues with regard to HOAs and the CCRs, and how can we, overcome those restrictions, because as Montgomery County, like every other locality in the country, as it continue to expand their municipalities and exchanging public land to selling it to developers, you're going to see more CCRs being developed, or HOAs, and So there's a lot of concern as far as people who have ham radio licenses really being impacted with any new expansion going on in their states. But again, thank you for all the work you've done in putting this, I'll call it the Bible, together.
Thank you, Dave.
Okay, Fred, go ahead.
Thank you, Dave.
Okay. Well, John, Brett, got anything more?
I believe we have anything else. We'll answer any questions. Otherwise, I think we've covered the field. David Siddell, do you have anything else you want to add? You're the bright person in the room.
Certainly nothing from me. And I deny that I'm bright.
Okay,
Want to thank all you gentlemen for showing up here tonight and providing that information. We're grateful.
yes, very much
Our
so.
pleasure.
Indeed.
John, could you send me the slides of your presentation when we get done here?
Yes, I'll get them to you probably in the morning, but I'll get them to you.
That'd be fine. Okay,
Anything that you want to put out to our general audience, let us know. We can post it online in various places.
Very good, sir.
okay. Well, we wrapped up an hour here. We could go longer, but there's no reason to unless somebody else has got some questions out there. I really appreciate both Fred and John coming on here and giving this presentation. It's a good one, and I think it'll get a lot of attention when we get it out there to post to the amateur world.
Yeah. John, Fred, great to see your smiling faces again. It's been a while, and hope we'll get more opportunities.
We hope so too. Tell Clara hi.
Will do.
Are you glad you're not in Hawaii at the moment, Marty?
I'm happy here. I'll settle for a washed out hurricane.
Thanks, Dan.
All right, thank you to everybody. And unless there's something more, I'm going to pull the plug, say 73s. And for those that join us tomorrow, I'll see you tomorrow's presentation. Same place, same time, same station.